All right, so this is the beginning of uh, part B of chapter 22. So we did the plural last time. Then you should have the term alveolus. Here you have three different pictures. Microscopic, all of them. So here you've got the bronchioles. You have the alveolar sacs and the alveoli. This is a single alveolus and shows the different cells, placement of three different, excuse me, three different pulmonary capillaries. And then down here, you see the respiratory membrane. The respiratory membrane has two layers of simple squamous epithelium. You have the wall of the capillary, which we've already described, and you have the wall of the alveolus. So wherever they touch, you can have gas exchange. Now here, they're focusing on the two that move the most, but these are definitely not the only gases that are exchanged. The most numerous gas in our environment is nitrogen. So you can have a respiratory membrane exchange here, 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 and here, which is the enlargement. All right, so the alveolus is the functional unit of the lung. We use the term functional unit back in the skeletal system with osteon and trabecula. We also use the functional unit in the muscle system for the sarcomere. So it's the smallest part of the lung where gas exchange occurs. It's composed of simple squamous epithelium surrounded by areolar tissue, which is going to anchor the outer alveoli to the pleura, the visceral pleura, and it helps fill in the gaps between the pulmonary capillaries, and the alveoli. So you can have lymphatic cells, leukocytes, lymphocytes present, and macrophages there. There are three kinds of cells in the wall of the alveolus. The main and most numerous is the type 1 cells, also called squamous areolar cells. They make up the wall. So here you've got a cut into the alveolus, and you can see one cell here. Looking into the alveolus, you can see the outline of the cells and the nuclei. So they're the most numerous. Notice you have an opening right here, so they're not completely isolated from each other. All right, so second type of cells are called type 2 cells. These are also called great alveolar cells, and that's this purplish blue cell right here. Its job is to secrete surfactant. Surfactant is this turquoise coating that you see throughout all of the alveoli. Surfactant is a lipoprotein, so it reduces the surface tension to allow better gas exchange. The surfactant, okay, if the alveolus was inflated completely, it would have so much tension, surface tension, and it would prevent gas exchange. And so with the surfactant, it relaxes that so it's not tight. So it's kind of like when you blow up a balloon all the way and then you try and push in it, it's very hard to push in. And then as it uh, relaxes over time, it gets squishier. That's what the surfactant is going to do. You used to be able to distinguish between, or you still can, distinguish between a premature infant's ability or fetus before it's born, if its ability to withstand atmospheric air. If they were making surfactant, then they would have a better chance of survival. If they weren't making surfactant, then they probably weren't going to survive. In the last 10, at least 10 years, maybe 15, they have been able to supplement surfactant in preterm infants so that it isn't the life or death situation as well as it used to be. The third type of cell are the alveolar macrophages, and that's this pinkish purple cell, and it roams around. It's slightly mobile. It's going to roam around and phagocytize debris and pathogens in the alveoli. So, kind of like the uh, dendritic cells in the epidermis. These aren't the only ones that are embedded in various organs to help deal with the, oh, sorry, the dog's barking, to deal with pathogens and debris. So even though everything has been filtering it before it gets here, it's still possible for debris to wind up in the lungs. So those are the three kinds of cells that make up the alveoli, which is plural. Alveolus is singular. Okay, another video to watch. All right, so atmospheric air is the total force exerted by all of the gases in the air. The atmosphere that we live in is a mixture of gases. And so each of them are going to be a contributing factor to the total pressure. Gases have, in addition to volume, because they're at the highest energy state, the atoms are moving so quickly, they generate a force which we call pressure. So when we deal with gases, you have to not only consider the volume, but you also have to take into consideration the pressure that can be generated by them. Okay, there are 4 gas laws. 2 of them we need to cover. 2 of them I think are pretty self-explanatory. One of them I've already kind of mentioned. When you have a mixture of gases, each of them create a portion of that total. And so you have what we call partial, oops, that's extra, partial pressures. And so each gas is going to have a certain percentage of the pressure to get to the total pressure. Gases have the force, and that there's an inverse relationship. I see this down here. The pressure of the gas is inversely proportional to its volume, and that would be at the same temperature. And we've already encountered this concept with vasoconstriction and vasodilation. When you decrease the size of the lumen, lowering the volume, it increases the pressure. When you increase the volume, you decrease the pressure. You see the same thing in gases. The volume of a gas is directly proportional to its temperature. So the hotter the gas, higher temperature is going to increase the volume. Lower pressure, less volume. You see that in your tires of your car. Over the summer, it gets hot. The volume of gas, air in your tires is going to expand. So you typically have to let air out of your tires in the summer. In the winter, when it's cold, the tires are going to have less volume because they are colder. So you typically have to add air in the winter. The other gas law states that gases can dissolve into liquids. And we've talked about that with the cardiovascular system and blood. Oxygen goes into blood, it attaches to hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide goes into blood, it attaches to hemoglobin. There's a little bit floating in the plasma, but most of it's attached to hemoglobin. And that's what you're going to have to get over thinking. We breathe to get rid of carbon dioxide. We don't breathe so we can get oxygen. As long as we're on the surface of this planet, we should have enough oxygen. As long as we make enough hemoglobin in erythrocytes, we should have enough oxygen. Okay, so locations of gas and pressure and how they're changed. Your first location is atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure can be altered by altitude. The closer you are to the surface of the planet, the less pressure you have, or the more pressure, sorry. The farther away from the surface of the planet, the less pressure you have. So that's why if you're not used to being in the mountains and you decide to take a vacation up there and decide to go hiking, you're going to have to be careful because you're going to be sucking air because it's going to feel like you can't breathe if you're overexerting. Another attribute, altitude. When we go up in airplanes, 30,000 feet away from the surface of the planet, we have to have pressurized air cabins because we're not used to the lack of pressure at 30,000 feet. So Another thing, the reason people get sucked out of airplanes if there's a hole in the airplane is because the pressure inside is higher than the pressure outside. The universe wants to even that out. So, just like popping a balloon, when you poke a hole in the balloon, you're going to have the pressure inside the balloon make contact with the pressure outside. So it's going to tear a hole. Okay. The second location for gases and pressure is pleural or thoracic cavity pressure. We also call this intrapleural pressure. There are two mechanisms for changing thoracic cavity pressure. And they are the two parts of pulmonary ventilation. Oops, A-T-I-O-N. Pulmonary ventilation is going to change thoracic cavity pressure. And so you have expiration and inspiration. The muscles involved would be the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Or external intercostals. They are going to have the biggest contribution to pleural or thoracic cavity pressure or intrapleural pressure. When they contract, they're going to cause inspiration. You can contract them more forcefully. You can contract them less forcefully. And we'll show the mechanisms of that when we get deeper into the chapter, when we go through expiration. Now, those are going to work against the internal intercostal muscles. They work in opposition. The internal intercostal muscles are going to help with expiration, forced expiration. There's some other muscles, and we'll see them when we get deeper in the chapter, that can help them, but the diaphragm and external intercostals work together with pulmonary ventilation, normal pulmonary ventilation, and forced inspiration. The internal intercostals help with forced expiration, expiration. Okay. Another location of gases and pressure would be the alveoli or the lungs. This is also referred to as intrapulmonary pressure or space. With the alveoli, there are two ways to alter the pressure. You have pulmonary ventilation, and you have alveolar gas exchange, which we'll define later when we look at the three gas exchanges. Okay, so two mechanisms for changing alveolar pressure. The next area where we have gases and pressure is the blood. The blood is going to be exposed and involved in alveolar gas exchange and systemic gas exchange. So alveolar, that's an E, and systemic gas exchanges. There's two gas exchanges because you have blood in the pulmonary circuit and you have blood in the systemic circuit. So you're going to have two ways to alter the blood pressure or the blood gas pressure and the gas volumes. And this is why there's a intimate relationship between the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. With cardiopulmonary resuscitation, you're doing chest compressions and you're doing artificial respirations. It's probably been about 20 years ago, till about 10 years ago, they some people stopped doing respiratory assistance, breathing, because they felt that just doing chest compressions was enough. And now they've gone back to doing both because they realized that, yeah, you do need both. They thought at the time there was enough oxygen in the blood that as long as you circulated it, that's what was needed. The last place is going to be the cells and tissues of the body. Cells would be intracellular. Cellular. And then in the tissues, it's called interstitial. Okay, the mechanisms for changing those kinds of gases and pressures would be systemic gas exchange, and cellular respiration. Remember back in chapters 2 and 26, the first unit, we covered cellular respiration, where we used up oxygen and we generated carbon dioxide. So that alters, there's some other metabolic reactions that do the same thing, but we're changing the volumes of gases. Systemic gas exchange alters that as well. So if we look at the big picture, there are gas exchanges between the alveoli and, or the atmosphere and the alveoli. That's one kind of gas exchange. There's gas exchange between the alveoli and the blood, and there's gas exchange between the blood and the cells of the body. The pleural and thoracic cavity is important because it's going to help with changing pressures between the atmosphere and the alveoli. But those are your three gas exchanges. The names of the three gas exchanges are pulmonary ventilation, which has two actions. Oops, you have to expirate or expire, expiration, and inspiration. And then you have alveolar gas exchange and systemic gas exchange. And that's what we see here. So with pulmonary ventilation, we're exchanging gases between the atmosphere and the alveoli. The product is what leaves in the pulmonary veins, which is also going to be referenced down here. The second gas exchange is going to exchange gases between the alveoli and the blood. Oh, sorry, I did that wrong. Okay. Pulmonary ventilation exchanges gases between the atmosphere and the alveoli. Okay. But this is the product here. This is what's going to be, no, that's right. The product is going to be what we expire. The second gas exchange is between the alveoli and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. The product being what leaves in the pulmonary veins. And that would be alveolar gas exchange. Systemic gas exchange, we have to exchange gases between the blood and the systemic capillaries and the tissues of the body. The product being what returns to the lungs in the pulmonary circuit. So it's going to leave through the systemic veins and go into the pulmonary arteries. So again, three-ring circus, all three rings are going on at the same time and they're all going to interact with each other. So first, another video to watch, changes in the partial pressures of gases for oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay, with pulmonary ventilation, you have two actions, inspiration and expiration, or inhalation and exhalation. So the first one is inspiration, and you're going to have two slides for this objective. Inspiration is caused because we lower the pressures in the body to less than atmospheric pressure. We see the contraction. Oops. We see the contraction of the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles, and that's going to decrease the thoracic cavity pressure. At the same time, alveolar gas exchange occurs, and it's going to lower the alveolar pressure. So air moves inside. So what does this mean? It means that the diaphragm is going to go from a dome to being flattened because it gets pulled down. The external intercostal muscles are going to contract to elevate the ribs. If you think about taking a deep breath in, your chest elevates, and it's those intercostal muscles in between all the ribs that are going to contract and draw them up. So that would be normal pulmonary ventilation or normal inspiration. In addition to the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles contracting more forcefully, you can also get some assistance from the sternocleidomastoid, the scalenes, and the pectoralis minor to help with forced inspiration. So there's normal and then there's forced. Of these two, the biggest impact on inspiration is contracting of the diaphragm and external intercostals. And that's what we're going to see on the second slide. Atmospheric pressure is at sea level is 760 millimeters of mercury. Pleural cavity or intrapleural pressure, when the diaphragm contracts, and that's what we see here, is going to lower the pressure to 754 millimeters of mercury. The alveolar pressure is going to become 757. So air moves in. But the bigger difference is with the pleural cavity pressure or thoracic cavity pressure. Okay, so in your diagram, it has -6 and -3. To me, it was stupid to switch because they used to have these numbers. It's saying 6 less than normal and 3 less than normal. So 760 millimeters of mercury is also what we call 1 atmosphere. Okay, inspiration. So expiration, we raise the pressure within the body to be more than atmospheric pressure. This involves relaxation of the diaphragm and external intercostals, increasing thoracic cavity pressure. Alveolar gas exchange is also going to increase alveolar pressure. So air gets pushed out. Of these two, alveolar gas exchange has the biggest impact. For forced expiration, that's where the internal intercostal muscles come into play. They can push out more air than usual because you can't more forcefully relax. You only have one relaxation force. In addition to the internal intercostal muscles, they can also get some help from the rectus abdominis and the external oblique muscles to push more air out. Second slide for that same objective. Atmospheric pressure at normal, 760, with the relaxation of the diaphragm and the external intercostals, it's going to raise the pressure to 756 millimeters of mercury, because it used to be 754. And the alveolar pressure is going to raise to 763. So air is going to move out of the lungs. So over here you see +3, meaning 760 +3, and -4, 756 millimeters of mercury. So alveolar gas exchange has a bigger impact on expiration. Okay. Pulmonary ventilation. Another video changes, the alveolar pressure changes during expiration and inspiration. Controlling respiration, controlling pulmonary ventilation. You have the dorsal respiratory group, the ventral respiratory group, and the Pontine centers. Now, this is going to look a little bit different than your book explains it. I don't know where he got his references. I have a upper division physiology book that confirms how I was taught, so that's how you're going to learn it. The dorsal respiratory group is also called the inspiratory center. It spontaneously generates an impulse that lasts 2 or 3 seconds. And that's this blue area here, this bigger blue area. That generates what we call normal tidal volume or normal pulmonary ventilation. Impulses are sent to the diaphragm and external intercostals to cause them to contract. It stops sending the impulses after 2 or 3 seconds. There's a 2 or 3 second pause, and then it's going to generate another one. So normal pulmonary ventilation. This area receives impulses constantly about hydrogen ion levels and carbon dioxide levels in both the blood and cerebrospinal fluid. The blood is going to be monitored in the same places that we monitored it for blood pressure. So the aorta and the carotid sinus. And then we have chemoreceptors here in the medulla oblongata, and it's going to monitor the levels in cerebrospinal fluid in the arachnoid motor subarachnoid space. So that's your typical normal breathing. Oh, and just for FYI for parents, when your child tells you that they're going to hold their breath until they die, they're not going to die. They may pass out, but they'll start breathing on their own because it's a biological reflex to breathe. So breathe. No. Anyway, the ventral respiratory group is this smaller blue area called the expiratory center. It generates impulses to stimulate the internal intercostal muscles during forced expiration. So the internal intercostal muscles, their function is forced expiration, which you need for lab. It is able to inhibit the inspiratory center, because if you're trying to move more air out, you're going to not want to breathe in. In addition, we also have this area called the Pontine center of the pons. Yeah, some idiot decided to change the name. It used to be called the Pneumotaxic Center, which that made sense. Anyway, it's going to modify the depth and rate of breathing with input from your hypothalamus, depending on what's going on in the body. Because if you're sleeping, you're going to breathe slower, deeper. If you're excited, overexcited, stressed, you're going to breathe more shallow and rapid. Those are the two basic breathing patterns. You also get some input from the frontal lobe of the cerebrum because that's going to control skeletal muscles. Breathing patterns. The only one I know the name of is the Cheyne-Stokes breathing pattern, and that's not one you really want to see. You basically have several shallow breaths and then a deep breath, several shallow breaths and then a deep breath. And that typically indicates that the respiratory centers are shutting down and death is probably imminent. So those are the control centers in the midbrain. Okay, you have chemoreceptors to detect the chemistry in blood and the chemistry in cerebrospinal fluids. So the central chemoreceptors are located in the medulla oblongata, which we've already mentioned. They again detect carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion levels within cerebrospinal fluid. So we're detecting and monitoring carbon dioxide, not oxygen. They usually estimate that your carbon dioxide level or concentration is equal to your pH level or your hydrogen ion concentration. So if you're holding on to carbon dioxide, if your carbon dioxide levels go up, then you have more acids. If your carbon dioxide levels go down, then you're more basic. The peripheral chemoreceptors are the ones monitoring blood, and that's in the aortic bodies, down in the aortic arch, and the carotid bodies in the carotid sinus, right there at the distal end of the common carotid artery, where it branches into the internal and external carotid arteries. Again, detecting carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion levels, this time in blood rather than cerebrospinal fluid. They are mildly sensitive to oxygen. You have to be almost out of oxygen before you change your breathing. Both the central chemoreceptors and the peripheral chemoreceptors send their messages to the medulla oblongata, to that dorsal respiratory group. So we breathe to get rid of more or less carbon dioxide. We breathe to get rid of or hold on to more carbon dioxide. Because as long as we've got hemoglobin and erythrocytes, we're fine with oxygen. That's the cardiovascular system's job. In addition to chemoreceptors, we also have baroreceptors. They send continuous impulses regarding tension. They're embedded in the alveoli, the bronchioles, and the visceral pleura, which would be out here. So, to both the medulla oblongata and the pons. So, as you're breathing in, you don't want to pop your lungs. So, it prevents overinflation. This is a reflex. So, as you're breathing in, when you get to a certain tension, you're going to shut down inspiration with the medulla oblongatas inhibiting the inspiratory center and the pons helping that as well. So you have two parts of your brain that are going to help shut down and stop you from exploding your lungs. Again, you have a reflex that, like I said, if your kid holds his breath, yes, they may pass out, but it's only going to be temporary. They will start breathing on their own. Okay, so that makes the end of part B for chapter 22. So let's see if we can stop the recording.